We need to be very watchful of what is happening with inflation. Why watchful? Because the two factors, demand shooting up, supply falling behind, combined with supply side disruptions, with shipping delivering to ports, but not drivers to put what is delivered and take it to stores. This is causing inevitably pressure on prices. And this pressure we expect will continue all the way until mid next year, maybe all the way to the end of 2022. We do expect inflation to calm down by the end of next year. And we do know that central banks are very careful. So what are central banks doing? They're looking at two things. Still, the recovery is not quite as strong as we want it to be. Withdrawing monetary policy support can hit on growth. And on the other side, they need to be very careful with inflation dynamics, and especially of the anchoring of inflation expectations that would require them to take action. Now, imagine that advanced economies continue to spike up, emerging markets, developing countries fall behind, and advanced economies are pressed to normalize monetary policy. The repercussion for these countries that are not yet growing or not growing enough of a higher interest rate environment can be quite significant. And of course, then this would hold the recovery of the world economy back.
Wanted to also ask you about climate ahead of the COP26 summit, which I know you're participating in. And there was this big pledge in 2015 for the Paris Climate Accord with all of these very ambitious goals set out. How do you perceive the progress to be from countries around the world toward capping the temperatures at 2 degrees Celsius? It feels like there's still a lot of work to be done.
Absolutely. So good news. In terms of commitments to net zero by 2050, for some countries 2060, a lot of progress is made. In other words, for the long term, countries are gearing up in a way that matches the Paris Agreement. Before we started preparations for COP, only 1/3 of countries made pledges. Now we are at 3/4 and growing. Not so good news. We see less ambition demonstrably of what is going to be done in this decade. And let's remember, by 2030, we need to cut emissions by 45%. Let this number sink. We are not at all at this point of time geared for this decade to reach this objective.
You've also advocated for carbon pricing, and I wanted to ask you, as this debate is sort of live in the U.S. right now around the reconciliation bill, whether Democrats should be using something like a carbon tax to pay for universal pre-K and expanded care for the elderly and for children. Is that a good idea?
It is proven that carbon tax is the most efficient way to influence decarbonization, and countries that have adopted carbon tax have also generated revenues that they use to support their population, be it for just transition or to meet priority needs. Canada, just right next door, has done exactly that. But there are other ways to price carbon. You can trade carbon, you can put a market, and then the market helps decarbonization. You can also introduce what we would call a shadow price of carbon through regulation. In our view, every avenue should be pursued if we are to reach this 45% reduction target I talked about.